everyone, welcome back to SELFWIFE, the show where I practice centering myself in my own goddamn life for the very first time in my goddamn life. If you're anything like me and you put other people in front of you just effortlessly, like if it just comes naturally for you to put others' needs and wants and desires and joys and passions in front of your own, if you maybe don't even know what your needs, joys, desires, passions are because you're so used to deferring to another person, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say maybe you were raised by a narcissist like I was. And I'm here to tell you, if you relate to that, that your life is supposed to feel good to you and you get to be the center of your life. You are the center of your life. You get to listen to yourself. You get to tune into your own intuition. You get to ask yourself what you need. You get to ask yourself what you want, and then you get to do that. I know it's hard to go from prioritizing everybody else and putting yourself last to centering yourself. And that's why I'm doing a whole show based on it, because it is hard. And I am in the midst of doing it right now for the first time in my life. And I'm learning so much and I want to share. So thanks for tuning in. If you're new, thanks for tuning back in. If you are a loyal listener, I have some wild things to talk about today. And I also just want to say, I think this is going to be the beginning of a series because I am in the midst of receiving information about my life that changes my perception of my life. And it's happening now. Like today, I'm having these really big realizations and discovering new paths of study that I need to go down to kind of figure out what has happened to me. If you've been following me, if you haven't been following me, you might not know I was raised by a fundamentalist Christian, born again mother. I'm an only child. My parents were divorced by the time I was 5. Well, my dad was out of the house by the time I was 5. The divorce was final by the time I was 8, to get specific. But I have said before that the quickest way for me to explain how I was raised is I was raised in a bunker like Kimmy Schmidt. I did a TikTok series a couple months back called Christian Mom Nightmares, where I, for the very first time, just detailed the way I was raised and the strict, hyper vigilant, impossible to please mother that I had, and her control tactics and everything that she did as a means to control me, all under the guise of she was saving my soul. And I did this like 15-part TikTok series a few months back. It was very freeing for me. I had never shared just a bunch of stuff in a bullet pointed way prior to that. And it was nice just to say it all and to have it be heard. I had to use a voice filter because it was so scary for me to talk about some of that stuff. And even just reading a couple comments from people saying, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That shouldn't have happened to you. Those are really validating. If you were raised by abuse or if you've experienced any type of abuse, you know how validating it is to just have someone, sometimes anyone, say, that was not okay. I'm so sorry that happened to you. You didn't deserve it. It's not your fault. And I got that a little bit from sharing the TikTok videos, and I was satisfied. And I've even thought, oh, I'll probably do, one of my earliest episodes of this show is called The Story of the Day I Cut Off My Mom. And I talked about cutting her off for the first time in 2020. And I tell the story of those emails back and forth. But on this podcast, I have not talked about my childhood. And part of that is because it's like, where do you start? What is the point? Is it helpful? Do I want to, tell the stories without a voice filter for the first time? These things are on my mind, but I wasn't really sure when or if I would ever talk about it on this podcast. And then Ruby Franke of 8 Passengers was arrested along with Jody Hildebrandt, the leader of the umbrella cult called Connections with an X that Ruby Franke was a part of. All of the information I'm going to share with you is unraveling before me as we speak. I have been made privy because of the Ruby Franke arrest to information that pertains to my own life in such an extreme way. I'm just learning that that I'm not alone and that basically every single thing that I bullet pointed on in that TikTok series about growing up with a crazy Christian mom, I just called it that for like shorthand TikTok purposes, was systematic and was taught to my mom directly. And since I've been coming to this awareness, which started this morning, because TikTok is so incredible, I've received hundreds and hundreds of comments from other people saying exact same childhood, and this is where my parents learned it from too. So I am going to start talking to adult children who were raised the same way that I was, fundamentalist Christian evangelical environment. And I'm going to start reading these books that I've had flagged for me now. And I'm going to bring some of these people on the podcast because this is huge for me and for so many other people. Now, let me walk you through it if you don't know who Ruby Franke is. Ruby Franke is a mommy blogger. She has a YouTube channel called 8 Passengers. 8 Passengers just signifies she has 6 kids and she's married. It's like Jesus, take the wheel, right? And the rest of us are passengers. So they live their life for Christ. They are Mormon. They live in Utah. And I've had her content bookmarked because people have been calling out how troubling it is for quite some time. She's been on my radar for perhaps a couple of years. I had never heard about Jodi Hildebrandt until yesterday or until this week. But Jodi Hildebrandt is very important to this case as well. Go ahead and look up some of these videos so that you can see for yourself. But what you see is Ruby constantly uploading content of her punishing her kids for it's very rare that she tells you exactly what the kids did. Sometimes she does, but often she's just telling you about their punishments. And these 6 kids receive punishments on a constant basis that range from having their beds taken away, being forced to sleep on the floor. If they wet the bed, they are forced to sleep on the bathroom floor, having their phones taken away. Ruby going around the house and collecting all of their favorite items, putting them into a trash bag, and then telling them they all have to pay her to get the items back. And the items will include like their homework that's due in class. She's got like a preschooler. I think it was when her daughter was in kindergarten, I think actually, and she forgot to pack her own lunch. Ruby says that in kindergarten, it's her kids' responsibility to pack their own lunches, which is ridiculous. And the teacher called her and said, like, your daughter, Eve, forgot to pack her lunch. And Ruby said, okay, then she's going to have to starve. And I really hope you don't give her any food either, because this is how she learns. It's very clear for me and for people who understand the developmental stages of children. It's very clear for anybody who has any sort of background teaching children, working with children, counseling children, that she has absolutely no idea about the developmental stages and what children are capable of, and also what children need, like the type of feedback and discipline. Children need discipline, but the type of discipline that they need is very much dependent on their age and their developmental level, and she does not understand this clearly. It's clear the more you look into her content as well that she is just very uneducated when it comes to really anything real, and all of her education comes from Jodi Hildebrandt. That's very similar to my mom. We'll talk about that in a minute. And I think that this is a through line for parents who subscribe to the type of parenting tactics that 8 Passengers sells. She makes money teaching parenting strategies to other Mormons, but it's people who have no formal education, no real education about like the science of the brain or the developing body, or understanding behavioral strategies, or how to encourage better behavior, or when to even push for better behavior. Because so much of the stuff that she harps on in these videos is, first of all, incredibly familiar. That was the first thing that really struck me. Was I have never seen the way that I was raised on camera before until I started seeing these 8 Passengers videos come across my feed. It's all very bone chilling, but it's her reprimanding her kids for being not even just imperfect, but failing to meet standards that she arbitrarily applies to each and every situation just so that they are falling beneath them. I'll give you one example. Eve is her youngest daughter. In this video, she looks about 5 or 6 years old. You see Ruby filming. Also, Ruby has a camera in her hands for so much of this. It's wild that we have so much footage of the way that she treats these children because she puts it on the internet as training material for other parents to mimic in their own homes. That's how much she doesn't think that what she's doing is abuse. I want to remind you, though, that when the camera is off, all of the saccharine, sweet voices that she uses to deliver the consequences definitely turns into screaming, and those kids live in fear. I can tell. There's a video of her son introducing like a family yoga session, and he is completely gone. He is completely dissociated. It's a visceral feeling for me to watch that video because I feel he's just emptied all the way out. You can, like, the life has been drained from his eyes because of the parenting style of Ruby Franke and her husband, Kevin Franke. We don't hear a lot about him because she's the star of the videos. Every once in a while, you'll see her go like, "Do you want to weigh in?" And he'll be like, "Yeah, I agree." But it's mostly coming from her, so I'm mostly going to be talking about her. In this example with her youngest daughter, Eve, you see Ruby holding the camera and saying, "Eve, go," pretty aggressively too, not in a excited tone of voice. Ruby is not leading with an excited tone of voice. It's a punitive tone of voice. And she says something like, "Eve, go get your shoes on. We're going to the movies." And Eve looks a little bit thrown and she says, "What movie?" And that right there is enough for Ruby to go into punishment mode. That is a huge no-no in Ruby Franke's house for her daughter to ask what movie, instead of immediately snapping into robot mode and going, "Yes, Mom, I will excitedly go get my shoes. I know that that's the requirement because my mom was the exact same way." So you see in this video, after the little girl asks what movie, Ruby immediately gets on the phone and puts on a show for whoever is on the other line. "Hi. Oh my gosh, I'm just calling to see, is your daughter available to babysit?" Punishing Eve. She doesn't relay this information to Eve. She just turns around and picks up the phone. And you hear Eve in the background run over to Mom. You see her. She throws her arms around the back of her mom. "I'm sorry, Mommy. I'm really sorry, Mommy." She already knows how to apologize. She already knows that she doesn't have to understand what she did wrong, but she does need to understand that she needs to start apologizing because the punishments have begun. The woman on the other line says that the babysitter's not available. Ruby's like, "That sounds so lovely. Okay, I'll talk to you later." Hangs up the phone, gets down on Eve's level, says, "You owe me a huge apology." Of course, Eve runs over. "I'm really sorry. I did apologize." "No, you need to do it again right now so that I can hear you. That was not okay." And then she explains, "When I say that we're going to the movies, you are humble and grateful. And it's your job to run excitedly and put your shoes on." And, "Okay, I'm sorry, Mommy. I'm sorry, Mommy." That was my whole childhood. And I tried to explain this in the TikTok videos. And when I try to explain it, I feel that I'm not able to get it across. The reality that I was always in trouble, it's hard to explain that because when you tell somebody like my mom, I was in trouble all the time, I could never leave the house, like she was constantly punishing me. It's like, well, what kind of kid were you? Were you a little monster? No. I was so obedient. I so badly wanted to please this woman. And I see that in Ruby's kids too. Her oldest daughter actually made a statement. She has already moved out. She's over the age of 18. She made a statement saying, this needed to happen, which is amazing. But she shows up in a lot of their videos, and you can tell she's learned to be so diplomatic. There are even videos of her talking Ruby down from being worked up over a child made a mistake. And I relate to her. From what I've seen of the oldest daughter, I relate to her so much because the only choice you have in an environment where your parent has total control, and if you don't choose the exact sequence of words and deliver them with the emotion that your parent is requiring you of at any given time, you are severely punished. It is horrifying. You're never out of fight or flight. You know that you're gonna fuck up. You don't know when it's gonna happen or how it's gonna happen, but you know it's going to happen because almost everything that you do, anything that you express, a question that you ask, if you show that you have your own free will and you have desires that are not explicitly okayed by your parent, then that means that you're going to be punished. This Ruby Franke case is the first time I've ever seen what I experienced on camera. And I have been marveling at that for quite some time. Just like, wow, there really is no shame. She has such an air of authority about her. You would think that this woman was an expert on children, even though she very clearly, to me, somebody who honestly, I have expertise in when it comes to child rearing because of the type of work I did with children in the classroom and in the home setting at all ages. Up until high school is the only age that I haven't worked with. Newborn babies to 8th grade I've worked with. I know about developmental stages. I know about behavioral strategies. I know what works and what doesn't work. I'm telling you right now, I know more about children than Ruby Franke does. And yet, she's making apparently millions of dollars training other adults to be abusive to their kids. So the whole story has been about she was finally arrested last week because the kids, two of her children, escaped out of a window from what the police referred to as a panic room in their house that was beneath the basement, if I'm not mistaken, and had a Fort Knox style lock on the front of it. So no one was getting out. And she had locked the kids in there with no food or water, and she had bound their ankles and wrists with tape. And two of the kids escaped out of the window and went to the neighbor's house, and they were looking malnourished, and there were tape marks on their wrists and ankles. And the neighbors called the police, and Ruby was arrested. And along with Jody Hildebrandt, who comes into the story, and you learn all of the teachings that Ruby is training her family with have come directly from this Jody Hildebrandt character. There's some talk about them having a romantic relationship behind the scenes. I'm still looking into this case. I will be coming back with research on this. I'm just going to tell you what's coming up for me right now. Seeing that Ruby and Jody were arrested felt very validating to me. That's been kind of my experience for the past few days is, wow, I recognize this as abuse because I went through it. People who didn't go through it are able to look at it. Well, people who did go through it obviously recognize it as abuse, but people who didn't are able to look at those videos and go, wow, like that is very extreme. She's crazy. This is so terrible to put children through this type of treatment. And again, I'm not gonna go through telling you about everything that's on video because it's just all available and you should see it with your own eyes. But for the most part, the public consensus is this is clearly abuse. And for the past few days, I've just been allowing myself to really feel the vindication of that because I recognize the treatment that she puts her kids through. I went through so much of the same stuff, although it was just my mom and I. I didn't have any siblings to share stories with. I'm really glad that they all have each other. I hope that they all band together. I hope one of them isn't, so far gone and so brainwashed that they somehow are on their mom's side. But you know what? I don't think that will happen. Well, Stockholm syndrome, you really never know. But it's been validating to see that treatment on a national scale be called abuse. And they're now in prison, Ruby and Jody, for several counts of child abuse. And that was going to be my big takeaway from this story. Just, I've known that it's abuse. I've gone through my own healing with it. And now it seems like on a wider scale, other people recognize what I went through as abuse. And it just kind of feels like it's just validating, right? And then today, I was on TikTok looking at the 8 passenger stuff. And I started to make a couple videos stitching some of the Ruby Franke content and adding my own stories to it and talking about how I so empathize with those kids and I went through such similar treatment and went in contact with my mom in 2020. And I just got hundreds of comments from people saying, This was also my mom. I also went through this. And then one person commented, yeah, Dr. James Dobson ruined my life. And instantly, I remembered that name. Dr. James Dobson was a topic of conversation as far back as I can remember. I remember him being cited often. He started a program called Focus on the Family. Focus on the Family and the Bible. Those were the two. Like, Focus on the Family was huge in my house. My mom loved it. I didn't interact with it. I didn't care to. I didn't think about it when I was a kid. I didn't know that the way I was being treated had anything to do with that until someone made this comment on my TikTok. And I go, oh my God, wait, my mom loved James Dobson. I haven't heard that name since I lived at home, probably. And I look him up and I find that he wrote a book called The Strong-Willed Child. Brings back another memory of the fact that my mom had and loved that book, recommended it to people in front of me. I remember her talking to me about being a strong-willed child and how that was bad. I feel that I distinctly remember her calling it Breaking the Strong-Willed Child, but that's not the name of the book. It's just called The Strong-Willed Child, which is interesting. I start to look into that book and James Dobson. And for about 2 hours today, I was inundated with stories from people who are in my comments, flooding my comments with their own stories about their mom and dad adopting James Dobson's teachings and how it ruined their childhood. And also just searching the hashtag on TikTok and listening to what people have to say about it. And every single thing that people have listed so far as being directly from James Dobson's teachings is something that I mentioned in that 15-part TikTok series about how my mom treated me. I thought my mom was shooting from the hip. I didn't know anybody else like her. I don't know if other people at our church were raising their children according to his teachings. I don't know. All I know is that my mom was the strictest mom that I knew of, and I felt incredibly isolated and alone because my house was full of rules and regulations that I did not understand, that were impossible for me to meet, and that nobody I talked to could relate to. Nobody. Everyone knew I had the strict mom. Everyone knew I wasn't going to be allowed to do the thing. Everybody knew that I was going to get in trouble if I tried to do the thing. Like, it was very well known that I didn't leave that house unless she was either with me or unless, she had ordained some little outing to be pure enough in the eyes of the Lord for me to participate in. I'm not going to retell all the stories about my childhood in this episode, but I am going to briefly go through the list and tell you what I've learned from that list of things my mom used to do that coincides with James Dobson's teachings. Because now what I'm grappling with is how much of it was my mom and her undiagnosed mental illness, let's say, or her unhealed trauma that she's passing on, and how much of it is directly taught to adults by James Dobson, who is still practicing. He's a psychologist, and he is very, very wealthy, and he is harming millions of people. So the very first thing on this list of things my mom did is, if she told me to do something, I wasn't allowed to just say okay and go do it. I had to say yes, ma'am. Otherwise, I was in trouble. That's displayed in Ruby Franke's 8 Passengers videos as well. If they don't have, she cites humility a lot. You need to be more humble and you need to be more grateful and you need to do this task, or you need to accept this punishment with a great attitude. That was put on me a lot too. I wasn't allowed to look disappointed. I wasn't allowed to look quizzical. I wasn't allowed to ask follow-up questions. I just had to say, okay, yes, ma'am, like a robot with a big smile on my face, no matter what it was. If I was being punished, I had to seem happy about it. If I was being told to do something, I had to seem happy about it. If I was being told to clean the entire house, including her room, which was my job, I had to be thrilled. I had to whistle while I worked. Apparently that comes from James Dobson. Good to know. not being able to miss a day of church and not adhering to me when I'm ill is hugely prevalent in the 8 Passengers videos. There's this video she has of like, my daughter says it's time for her to go to the emergency room and I just don't want to take her. So I'm in the bathroom. She's making a video. And so I'm stalling. So I did my hair. I took a shower. I cleaned the bathroom. I just don't want to take her. I'm fully convinced that that is rooted in you pray for your children to be healed. You don't take them to a doctor. That's how my parents operated as well. Also, a story that I tell now is that when there was one time I had the flu as a kid, I was like vomiting a lot, but I wasn't allowed to miss a day of church because that would be a sin. And I had to be on church property, my mom said, according to God. And so she drove us to church. She went in and she left me to sit in the car for the entirety of the 2.5 hour, church service with a trash can in my lap that I could barf into if I needed to barf. I see that exact same coldness and disconnect from the child's wellness from Ruby Franke. There's a video where one of her kiddos calls her and says, like, I'm at school and I threw up. And she's like, how many times did you throw up? Because I'm not coming to pick you up unless it's 3. You have to throw up 3 times. And I'm not driving out of my way to come get you. Like, just really no concern for illness. I'm seeing that. That is apparently part of these teachings. Giving me things just to take them away. That is so, almost every video of Ruby is her throwing her kids' things away gleefully, eating her kids' candy and knowing that they're going to be devastated about it and gleefully eating it on camera, threatening to cut off the head of one of her kids' teddy bears. There's a lot of like collecting their items and taking things away from them, taking comfort away, telling them that they are not allowed privacy in her home because it's her job to watch and hear everything they do at any given time to make sure that they're living in truth and not in distortion, and there is no such thing as privacy and everything in the house belongs to her and they are grateful that she gives them permission to use it. My mom did all of that stuff. Ruby does a lot of like food withholding as punishment. There was one time when I was of driving age, so I was an adult, and I went to the grocery store because that was my job. I grocery shopped for us because my mom didn't care. She didn't care about food or preparing food, and I did. I liked it. So she was like, great, that's your job now. I don't give a fuck. You go to she would never say fuck. She's like, you go to the store. And one month she determined that I had bought too many snacks and she got livid and she was like, how dare you? You are so disrespectful. You wasted my money, and the punishment is you're not allowed to eat any food at this home for a month. Have fun finding other places to go and get food. You are so ungrateful. You are so selfish. You are so disrespectful for buying this many snacks. Meanwhile, she taught me nothing about nutrition. She had no parameters ever put in place on what I was and wasn't allowed to buy at the store. Otherwise, I fucking wouldn't have bought too many snacks. And I distinctly remember going in the cupboard after that and being like, was it the box of Cheez-Its that put it over the edge? Like, our house was a snack house. It was a junk food house. That's all we ever ate. That's what I was raised on. And so, I don't know, arbitrarily one day she took that to be a sign of disrespect and I wasn't permitted to eat at our house, breakfast, lunch, or dinner. So I would have to go to school early, get breakfast at school. Then I would have to ask somebody if I could go to their house after high school so that I could eat dinner and just like have lunch at school too. So I'm noticing that parallel between my mom and Ruby Franke. Oh, Ruby says like no bikinis are allowed in the house. Same. She says no sleepovers. Kids are not allowed sleepovers. My mom used to put me, I wasn't allowed to go to sleepovers ever because she taught me that every adult man was going to want to rape me. And there was one time when it was my very best friend in like 5th grade, and she was having a sleepover for her birthday party, and I just really, really, really wanted to go. She was my best friend. So I begged my mom to go. And she said, okay, listen, I might let you go, but first I need to know if you know how to scream loud enough, just in case a man climbs into your sleeping bag with you and tries to rape you. 10 years old, let's say, at this point in 5th grade, so 10 or 11 years old. First of all, she knew. The reason I asked is because this friend's parents were divorced. Dad was out of the house. And I knew that that was the big thing that my mom taught me all the time, is that all adult men just want to fuck. And she said I was at greater risk of it because I had like big, pretty features, she said. And so she was like, you are at risk everywhere you go. And just so you know, like, your beauty is a curse and everyone's going to harm you because of it. That she drilled that into me very early on. And she called to verify that the dad was out of the house for this slumber party. And she was like, I get that, but a man could show up at any time. This kid's mom could have her boyfriend come over. I don't know. The pizza man could come over, see you, and try to rape you. So she said, before I decide if you're allowed to go, we're going to do some scream drills because I need to know that you can scream loud enough if someone tries to rape you that you'll wake up the parents in the other room. And she said, who knows if the parents are sleeping next to the room where you guys are going to be? It could be a big house. They could be at the whole other end of the house. So she said, let's practice. And she made me go to one end of our house and she went to the total opposite end of the house and she made me scream as loud as I could. And we did that for, I don't know, 30 minutes of drills to see if I could scream loud enough. She then brought a sleeping bag out into the living room, uncurled it, had me climb in, and we role played her being an adult trying to climb into my suitcase in the middle of the night. And what would I say? She's like, because, maybe you'd be scared and you wouldn't want to scream. So let's just do it so that when it happens, basically, you're going to know. And I want to know that your scream is loud enough to wake mom up at the other end of the house in this hypothetical situation where you, a 10-year-old, are being raped by a surprise man who shows up to this slumber party for your best friend. So I recognize that in Ruby Franke's parenting. I'm like, I fucking went through the same thing. Bikinis were totally off limits. I stopped being able to wear bikinis by, like, I don't know, age 7. They became too suggestive. And again, my mom was like, it's your job to cover up. Men can't help themselves. They're just sexual creatures and they're going to want to fuck you. And again, my mom doesn't use this language, but I'm angry when I retell these stories. And I wasn't allowed to wear a 2-piece. I always had to keep covered up. I really had to fight for a tankini in high school. I had to fight for it. And there was one that she okayed. It showed like an inch of my midriff if I moved, and she really didn't like that, but it was the most modest one we could find. When she got remarried, I was then forbidden, because it would typically be if I was like going to a pool party or something, I couldn't wear a bikini in front of other people. But at home, I had a 2-piece bathing suit that I would wear outside to go lay out in the backyard and tan, because that's what you do when you're in high school. You lay out. Laying out was a big thing in the desert. And once she got remarried, I was forbidden to do that anymore because she said that if my stepdad saw me in a bikini, he would be sexually tempted. And Ruby Franke says those things as well. And so I'm just like, oh my God, like my whole life is being validated as being abusive. I wasn't allowed to go to the high school that was in my district because the mascot was the Sun Devils. I wasn't allowed to watch hardly anything, but certainly nothing with like I started to read Harry Potter when it came out. And once she found out about that, she took the books away from me mid book 3. Anything like Fantasia was the devil. Most things were seen as evil. And I see that in Ruby's vlogs too. Like, Ruby has this one video where she's like, I just left the principal's office at my daughter's school and I'm so upset. And it's because the kids were learning a TikTok dance. And because TikTok is just a portion of the song, it'll be like 20 seconds of a song. Apparently the 20 seconds they used was appropriate, but Ruby listened to the entirety of all the songs the kids were learning segments from and determined that some other lyrics later in the song were inappropriate. She said that the principal was forcing these teen girls to be, I don't know, suggestive and lustful, she said, even though they weren't even listening to that part of the song. That's my mom. And one of the main things that I think about often, and one of the main things that was revealed to me when I started to look up Dr. James Dobson today, is the carrying of the wooden spoon in the purse. Look at my TikTok comments right now under the Ruby Franke videos. There are so many people saying that they too were hit with wooden spoons because Dobson taught that distinctly, but not only hit with the exact same thing my mom did, carrying it around in a place where it can be easily visible so that you can refer to it as a threat to the kiddo to do something or to stop doing something. And several people in the comments said that their parents hit them so often with wooden spoons that they broke wooden spoons on them. And I learned that Dobson teaches parents to use a wooden spoon specifically because the hands are for love, but a wooden spoon is fine because it's not the hands, so it's not abuse. And apparently, again, I haven't read his books yet. I'm afraid to, but I need to now, clearly, because they ruined my childhood, come to find out. But apparently it's maybe seen legally, maybe in his day, as not abuse if you're not using your hands. Like he was helping parents cover their tracks, I guess, as well. So I look into Jodi Hildebrandt's Connections cult, and I posted a snippet of a video where she's saying Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. Like she's just revealing herself to be ignorant and just really lacking authority, and the last person who should be training other adults on how to be. I also am hearing rumblings that she has 2 adult children who don't speak to her, and she's divorced. So again, the last person to be training others. But I also relate to that because these people put themselves in these positions of authority and convince everybody that they should be there. For example, I heard that my mother was providing marital counseling at her church with my stepfather. My mom didn't even go to college. I am the first person in my family to go to college. She has no training, and she certainly shouldn't be counseling people about their marriages. The fact that she has done the same thing that Jodi Hildebrandt is doing and made herself a position of authority and convinced like a church board to allow her to counsel other people, but her relationship is abusive and her daughter doesn't even talk to her. It's a very Jodi Hildebrandt. And now I'm curious about all of the people who were raised in the late 80s and early 90s by the focus on the family, James Dobson doctrine, and how many of them still talk to their parents. How many of them can say that they have a functional relationship with their parents? How many of them have gone on to be in abusive romantic dynamics because that's all we fucking know? And another thing that's really sinister about Ruby Franke and James Dobson, come to find out, and focus on the family and these evangelical ways of parenting, really strict parenting, is that so much of the abuse is done to you while they are reminding you that they love you so much. And that's why they're doing it. It's on display in the videos. Ruby does it in the videos. She doesn't scream at them in the videos, but she does refer to screaming at them off camera. She does talk about that a lot. But in the videos, she'll be taking away their joy and livelihood and saying, like, but I do it because I love you. And this is, I know it's going to be very hard. I know. But you are going to have to sleep on the bathroom floor. Like it like I know that when she was taping up their wrists and ankles, she was telling them that she was following the Lord's desire for her and for them, and that it was a very loving act that she was doing to them. There are videos of her saying, "Can you see how much love there is in me saying that you have no privacy in this home? And I get to know about every single thing you do and think? Don't you see how much love there is in that?" That warps a person's understanding of love. And it disables a person from being able to recognize when they're being abused. I speak from experience. I have been in 3 romantic situations where I've been abused, and I don't look, I'm better about it now. In the past couple years, I have developed such strong boundaries. I do not fuck around with red flags anymore. I will cut you off when I see even one. Like, I really do feel like I've learned my lesson over and over and over, but I really have learned it. And I'm very clear now about what I will and won't accept. But that's very new. And I didn't used to be clear about it, because how can you get clear about that when your main provider, the main authority in your house, the voice of God to you — my mom is the voice of God to me. Everything came through her. She determined right or wrong. And she was always on me about stuff. And she was saying it was because she cared about my soul and because she didn't want me to suffer for an eternity in hell and because she loved me. But I was miserable and crying and constantly in fight or flight. And I felt empty. I did not know myself. I was not allowed to. All I knew about myself was that I was a dirty, filthy, rotten sinner and that I could truly never not be that. Like I could, what I had to do every single night, I was taught an acronym for pray, PRAY, praise, repent, ask, yield. Every single night, repentance is part of my nightly routine. So I have to think during the day, was there something I could have done better? How did I fail today? She made me so aware of everything that was wrong with me at all times and made me feel like a failure no matter what. And that ruins a child. And they do it while they tell you that it's coming from a place of unwavering love and devotion to your eternal well-being. And my mom used to say, you can hate me all you want, but I care about your soul. I don't want you suffering for hell, for eternity in hell. That's why you're not allowed to ever have fun or experience joy in this life. And she would say, this life is fleeting, but eternity isn't. And I'm securing your eternity in heaven by not letting you ever leave your room or talk to anybody or experience an emotion other than pious devotion to the Lord. It is the I've said this before, fundamentalist religious extremism and parenting tactics like this are the ultimate expectations versus reality. They think that they are preparing you for the world, but they are breaking you down so that you will not survive in the world. They think that they are strengthening your relationship with God. They are making you an atheist. Like, I hate Christianity. I loathe it. My mom still tells me, not still, but she did up until I cut her off, that the Bible promises her that even though I've stepped away from the faith, I will come back. And she says it to me almost like a threat. The Bible, you're coming back to the Lord. That's what God says. You might not know it, but it's happening. And I will rejoice, on that day. There is no respect, no free will granted to me. Oh God, I'm looking back at this list now, like the music I wasn't allowed to listen to. Also, there was so much of like offering opportunities to me just so that she could take them away. Just like that Ruby video where she's like, go get your shoes on, we're going to the movie. And because the child had the audacity to ask what movie they were seeing, she was punished and forced to almost wasn't allowed to go, but the babysitter wasn't available, and forced to give her mom a huge apology. And then mom says, when I tell you that we're going to the movie, mom used herself as an example. She said, if I were told that we were going to the movie, I would never ask what movie. I would just be grateful and go. That's bullshit. It's a totally normal, reasonable question. But come to find out, Dr. James Dobson trains adults to think of their children who are alive and who have brains and spirits and wills of their own, that is a sign of basically heading towards hell. And if you don't break them of their free will and break them of their spirit, then they're going to spend eternity in hell. It is so distorted to learn that this comes directly from a psychologist who is still making money teaching families this to this day. Like, I really want to like blow this case wide open type thing. Like, I would love to make a documentary about this. I feel that it's in my future to do this because my life has been so impacted by this shit. And to have the realization today, you guys, that every single thing on this list that was absolutely batshit she was taught to do is really mind-blowing. Maybe she put her little spin and twist on certain things, like when she would teach me to rebuke Satan when the dog jumped on me. That one might have come from her. I'll find out when I read James Dobson's book. But these teachings are coming from this one fucking guy? Look, religious extremism Mormonism, fundamentalist Christianity. If you listen to this show, if you follow me, you already know how I feel about it. It is such a distortion. It's really unfortunate because religion was created to give people peace and comfort and bring people together. And I think that spirituality really is something that people need. We need to remember that we have a soul and a spirit that needs to be fed, that is here to guide us through this life. I think that that's wonderful. Religion distorts spirituality like crazy. Religion and spirituality are not friends. I've come to learn in my studies and in my deconstruction of the Christianity I was raised in. And it's just so wild to me that people like Ruby and Jody and my mother can really believe that constantly breaking the spirit of their child and watching their children be broken. It's wild to me that they can really believe that that's God's will. I do sense that there's some actually I got a comment from a parent on one of my TikToks that said that she raised her kids that way and now she works on helping them heal from the way she raised them. I want to get her on the podcast. I commented back and I was like, I need to hear more about your perspective because that's what I want to hear about. Like adults who are I can go ahead and blame Dobson all I want, and I do, but it's the perpetuation too. Like somebody has to be able to stand up and be like, "Hey, this isn't right." Oh, you know what? That somebody is probably my dad because my dad tells a story about how my mom encouraged him to spank me as well. Also, I just want to emphasize again, I was such a good kid. I was so easy. I wasn't fussy. I was obedient. But like you see in these Ruby Franke videos, anything that isn't robotic, anything that's remotely human is seen as disrespectful. So it didn't matter how obedient I was still being threatened with spanking and being spanked constantly, right? Well, my mom encouraged my dad to do that, and he did one time. And he and I don't even remember. Well, I think I do remember the spanking a little bit, but what I mostly remember is him coming. I'm crying my eyes out. Of course, my dad's 6'4". I was probably oh god, he was out of the house by 5, so I must have been 4 or 5 years old. So he came in to my bedroom. I think the same night this is what I remember, and apologized to me and said, I'm so sorry. I'm never going to do that to you again. And we talk about it still. He remembers too, because he said, I did it because she encouraged me to. And you cried and it was terrible. And he said, I don't know. I just saw you crying and it clicked for me that you didn't need that. He says to me now, he's like, you were such a smart, communicative kid. And I knew that all I really needed to do was talk to you about something. If you did something that wasn't okay, that we wanted you to not do anymore, as all kids do, it is their job to do that, to test the boundaries. That's literally their job. They're learning what the boundaries are. They're learning what isn't okay. So I pushed a boundary and he said, I knew after I spanked you and saw you crying and he said, it broke my heart to see you crying. And I just, in that moment, was like, all this girl needs is a conversation. And he said, from that moment on, I never punished you again. I just, if anything ever came up, we talked about it and you got it. He's like, you're smart. You didn't need that. He broke it. He broke the curse. He broke the lineage of James Dobson's teachings just in that one moment. I'm having that realization right now. He was one of the parents that was like, no, because I'm looking at my kid, I'm tuning into my kid, and I'm seeing that this isn't right. But unfortunately, for myriad reasons, right? Like so many adults weren't able to do that because there's an authority, a white male, rich psychologist, authority figure, doctor telling them that this is what they have to do. I guess they really put his word over the responses of their children who are right in front of them. And I find that to be very sad. I find that to be maybe somewhat malicious. Like maybe even after studying James Dobson and Focus on the Family, it's like triggering to even say that. It was just spoken of so much in my household and I had no idea. I didn't know Focus on the Family had anything to do with children, raising children. I didn't know it was about me. I didn't know my mom was getting information about me when she was talking about Focus on the Family. And I knew about the book, the Strong-Willed Child book, because she talked about it a lot. But I was too young to be like, that's why, it was just like my mom was doing this stuff to me. And I had forgotten totally about the book until someone mentioned it today on TikTok. And so many people in my comments are like, my mom loved Focus on the Family. Oh, we went on a family trip to the Focus on the Family headquarters. James Dobson was a hero in our house. It ruined my childhood too. It ruined my childhood too. It ruined my childhood too. And so I'm having this mental shift of like, what I used to believe, which is that I had a very unique 1 in a million type of childhood because I had a very unique 1 in a million type of mother. I have, studied her behavior and come to understand some things on my own about why she does certain things that she does. But this is the first time that all of the crazy Christian stuff that I thought she was making up as she went, it's the first time I'm learning that it was like a movement throughout the 80s and 90s and that there are thousands of us. Oh my God, so many people in my comments are like, yeah, now I just have CPTSD. Like Dr. James Dobson trained an entire army of white evangelicals to abuse and traumatize their kids. And now we all just have CPTSD. From what I'm picking up, we all have a lot of issues with feeling our own feelings and tuning into our body. Oh my God, people were linking this to the fawn response today, which the fawn response shows up when a kid, they can't flee, they can't fight. And so there's a third option when they're being like put under such tremendous stress and trauma, which is the fawn response, which is, I made a TikTok video about this a couple years ago. It is what all of Ruby Franke's kids do in all those videos. And it has been almost my entire life, where you just go like, you match what your abuser is saying, you agree with them, you repent profusely, you tell them, oh my God, I am so sorry, like you're absolutely right, you just fawn, because it's one of the strategies that you can use to survive. And they also, these types of parents, Ruby and my mother, they love when you fawn. And they also take my mom took pleasure in disciplining me and in ruining my day. And now I understand that it's because she was taught that she wasn't ruining my day, she was saving me from hell. So I guess what she was taking pleasure in is like her thinking that she's like a knight in shining armor for Jesus Christ or some shit, when the reality of it is so different. The expectation is, I'm a good soldier for the Lord, and I'm going to bring up my child to be a good soldier for the Lord, when that's the opposite. Like, I hate, loathe Christianity because of her, because of how it was used against me. And also now, because of my self-made education about the topic, and I know too much about the institution of several religions, but white nationalism, Christian fundamentalism now, like I know way too much about it. It's legitimately evil and being used for evil. Trump is ushering in a whole new wave of it, and I think that like modern day Christians, like a whole subsect of them, should be deemed terrorists in a real way. I mean, a man is going to walk into a shop and kill the shop owner because she has a pride flag outside. Like, the expectation from Ruby Franke and Jody is that the kids will be humble and obedient. And the thing is, okay, that one, like in the case of myself, did turn out to be true. I am humble and obedient in the face of abuse to this day. It worked, Mom. I can't tell when someone's abusing me because that's all I ever knew. I can't separate abuse from love because as she was abusing me, literally as she was hitting me on my bare bottom with the wooden spoon, because the pants would give me too much of a cushion and I needed to really feel the consequences of my actions, she would say, this hurts me more than it hurts you. You know, she would hit me so hard 4 times, 1, 2, 3, 4. And, you know, I scream, cry, and she'd go, I know. It's because I love you. Do you know how much of a mindfuck that is? Do you know how much that just sets kids up to be quiet and obedient in the face of abuse? Like, how did none of these parents think about that? Like, what type of relationship are you training these kids for to be in the future? I have sought out, not even sought out, it's just like moth to a flame. I think people who are like my mother, narcissistic, authoritarian, place themselves in the position of God, are also drawn to people who have like been desensitized to that type of behavior, and we just come to, it's the narcissist empath thing, but it's like very true for like abuse and victim, you know, like victims of childhood abuse just go out into the world and they're just looking for mommy and daddy everywhere, and it just shows up in another person who wants to control every single thing that you say and do, who's constantly criticizing you, but they're saying that they're doing it because they want to make you better. Sound familiar, mom? Like a person who is constantly telling you that you're falling short, and you think it's because they care. A person who is constantly angry with you, but they're convincing you it's because they care. Like someone called these people today, and I think this is very accurate, groomers. Like I was groomed by my mother to be the perfect little victim. I've worked the fuck through that, so don't fucking listen to this and think that you're going to worm your way into my life and abuse me. Like it's not going to happen anymore. But I worked through that in CBT too. I did used to feel like the perfect victim because guess what? I was made to be. I was molded to be the perfect victim. You hear what they're saying. You just recognize that you've disappointed somebody that you love. You hear them out and you start to apologize and you fucking make it better. Even if you don't understand what they're saying and you don't agree that it's wrong, you just apologize and then you promise to make it up to them. That's what I was groomed to do. And so I've stayed in such unhealthy, toxic connections with people, friends and romantic partners alike, and work environments because I was groomed to stay there. That's another expectation versus reality thing. Moms like mine and Ruby Franke think that if they drill into a child the idea that every man is incapable of controlling his sexual urges, anything that they see that visually stimulates them makes them want to fuck, and it's not their fault, and it's totally the woman's responsibility to not tempt the man, and they just can't help it. All that does is groom you to be okay when men in your life start to display those behaviors. Instead of a man displaying really bad, negative, dangerous behavior and you responding by being like, I'm getting the fuck out of here, you just go, yeah, okay, I was told this was going to happen. I prepped for this. This is how you all are, right? Got it. How can we work through this together? I'm really going to be diving into this. I'm going to be doing more episodes about it. I want to bring guests on. It might be next week. It might take longer to coordinate that. Next week might be a different topic, but stay tuned because I'm going to do several parts to this topic. Dr. James Dobson, I was recommended the book Jesus and John Wayne. I'm going to start reading that. I need to look into The Strong-Willed Child, which I now know opens with an anecdote about a dog who doesn't immediately go to bed when James Dobson tells him to. So Dobson beats the shit out of the dog. And he's using that as an example of how to break the spirit of your child. The fact that there is still a practicing psychologist whose entire platform exists on the idea that you have to break the spirit of your child is terrifying to me. It's like a new layer of sadness to learn that, no, I'm not alone. And that's nice, I guess. But that the flip side of that is that there are just hundreds of thousands of people who were abused because a doctor told their parents to abuse them and is getting away with it and is being heralded as like a religious leader and like a teacher of like Jesus's teachings. It's horrifying, it's terrifying, it's enlightening, and I have a lot of reading to do, and I want to bring you some more stories. I want to talk to other people who were raised this way. If you know anything about James Dobson and Focus on the Family, if you were impacted by this, email me, come into any of my links, DM me, get in touch with me. There are ways to do that all over the internet. I would love to hear from you. I'm going to start diving into this and telling a story about all of the adult children who no longer speak to their parents because their parents were trained by James Dobson. Stay tuned for that because holy shit, this is an epidemic. This is ruining lives. Like, why did I not know more about this? I mean, I guess I did. It's just that my mom, I thought it was my mom. It wasn't like she was like, Dr. Dobson told me, to put the wooden spoon in my purse. All right, I'm going to stop myself because I'm going to come back on a future episode more armed with information, and I'm going to get some other people to start telling some of their stories too. And I'm just going to start deconstructing this and unpacking this with you guys. Thanks for listening. You can listen to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. You can also join my Patreon, which is helpful for me. It's only $5 a month, $5.28 a month, and I've actually started posting story times on there, stuff that I don't want to talk about publicly. So I think it's worth your while. I think there's interesting stuff on there, and it helps me. And also, it helps me if you review the show on any of the platforms that you listen on. After you listen to an episode, just, you can like tap the star and then say like, yay, or whatever you want to say. Because I want to keep doing this. I want to do this as a job. So, okay. Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening. I really do appreciate it. I'll see you next week.